so many leaders that I will talk to about trauma will say, oh, I haven't had any trauma, because so oftentimes trauma is thought of like a war veteran or someone who's maybe been in an abusive childhood situation, raised in an abusive home or something like that. And that's what you think, these horrific examples, and that's what trauma is.
Hello, Janelle. Welcome to Lazy Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm so excited to get to know you more and talk about your book, Your Way Back to Happy. I love this book. Like I mentioned to you before, we record this interview, that I read almost all of it, but I already want to reread everything because everything is just so good. And I've highlighted a lot of phrases already, and I'm ready to just ask you about your book and talk about trauma. How can we be happy in life? How can we choose happiness in life, knowing that in every day we can have challenges and there are other parts of our or areas of our life that we haven't really healed from. But before we dig deeper, Janelle, I want you to introduce yourself to our listeners. Who are you, your background, and what is your inspiration for writing this book?
You bet. Well, thank you, Christy, for having me on your show. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm Janelle Bruland, and I'm an entrepreneur and executive coach and author, also a mom. And I wrote this book, Your Way Back to Happy, to be able to help really anyone face the challenges of their past. It's called Your Way Back to Happy: How to Turn the Pain of Your Past into a Future of Freedom, Purpose, and Peace. And it's really about anyone who's faced a past challenge and hasn't really dealt with that, and especially for the business leader and entrepreneur. And for myself, I thought that everything was going really well, had a really wonderful life, and then had something happen to me that really woke me up to, wow, there's something in my past that is unresolved that I really need to dig into and take a look at. And then once I went through my own healing journey, I thought I have to talk about this to others. And so that's how the book was born.
Yeah, I love that. And I know in the book you mentioned that it took you years to uncover the problem, right? And to get healing from it. And I love the story you shared about your airport breakdown. Could you please tell us about it?
You bet. Well, how I discovered and really began to do the work on this is it happened after a weekend trip where I had gone with a girlfriend for a fun weekend getaway, and we had such a good time. I live in Washington State, and we had gone up to California, and it was one of those friends that you have that maybe you don't see very often because you don't live near each other. But when you get together, it's just like you've never been apart, and you're able to just catch up again quickly, and it feels like you've never been away from each other, and they're just precious moments. And so we really had a wonderful time eating good food, having great conversation and walks on the beach. And too quickly, as they always are, it was time to come home. And I had two legs to come home to where I live in Washington State. So the first flight went really well, back to the Seattle-Tacoma airport. And then there was just a short flight that was going to be going from Seattle to Bellingham, where I live. And they had said that there was going to be some turbulence in the flight. And I thought, well, I don't like turbulence. I think as many of us don't, but I thought it's just a quick flight, and then I'll be home with my family, with my husband and my daughter. And I thought this will be fine. So as we were taking off, of course, the pilot comes on and says, okay, folks, this is going to be a bit of a rough ride. And so just make sure your seatbelts are fastened. You know what they typically say. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, as soon as we got started, the plane was whipping around and there was terrible turbulence. And I began to experience some anxiety because it was such a rough flight. It was nighttime, dark and stormy outside, and the plane was just whipping around. And I remember I was sitting next to an airline attendant, happened to be next to me in the seat going home. And she was calm as could be, and she went up above my head and she turned on the air on my face. And I remember looking at her and just being grateful for her taking a chance to do that. And then just thinking, how could she ever do this for a living? Thinking about being on a plane all of the time. And anyway, we were finally getting ready to land in Bellingham, and it was very rough. And I thought, okay, just a few more minutes, we'll be on the ground. And then it just continued to get rougher. And the pilot came on and said, I'm sorry, folks, we need to take you back to Seattle. It's just not safe to land. And so we circled back, headed back to Seattle. And when we got off the plane there, I mean, people were pretty shook up by the turbulent flight, but people were okay. And we're getting off the flight. I walked down the tarmac off of the plane. And like you mentioned, I just had this complete meltdown. I just burst into tears. I'm looking around at me as other passengers are coming off, and everybody else is fine. And I am not. I'm having this complete breakdown in the middle of the airport. And I remember calling my husband and saying, I'm not getting on another plane for home. And I was just crying to him. And anyway, long story short, I did finally get back home that day, but I was very curious what had happened in the airport. I mean, being somebody who's usually in control, thought, what in the world happened to me? And what I realized is this was trauma from my past that was suddenly coming out and overflowing. And all of these emotions and things that had been buried for so long in my life were finally making its debut. And it was time for me to deal with trauma and past pain that I had stuffed very deep.
Yeah. Wow. That is such, like I mentioned to you, a lot of people, they hate, not a lot. Some people, they hate flying. I hate flying, but I love to travel. I need to ride a plane because I'm from the Philippines and I'm currently living in Ohio. And so when I see my family in the Philippines, I had to take an airplane, right? I have to take an airplane.
Right.
So I hate the turbulence, but I have to live with it. So far, I've never had any experience anything like yours, and I don't want to, because that is such a what is that term? Traumatizing experience? Is that what you call it?
Yes, in itself, right? Exactly.
In itself, yeah. So I think as a business owner right now, there is this one trauma that I'm trying to overcome. And for you or for our listeners, it may be simple, but it happened a few years ago. And that was the time where I was asking my VA to pitch to other podcast hosts to have me as a guest on their podcast. And then she sent an email to this particular podcast host, but it wasn't really the podcast host who was replying to my VA. It was the VA of that podcast host.
Okay.
So the VA of that podcast host booked me for an interview. And he even said, well, actually, the podcast host wants to have a face-to-face interview because they observe that when it's a face-to-face interview, they get more traction on YouTube, and they want me to fly out to Florida, and I'm from Ohio.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, I'm not really available during that time, so I can do it online, and then the VA of that host said, okay, well, we'll book you for this date. And then the actual day of interview. So this is actually a podcast that's a real estate podcast. Of course, I'm not going to name the show and the host. And when I joined the Zoom meeting, you know what the podcast host asked me? Who are you? I don't know you're going to be here today.
Oh, wow.
And I don't think that this is a form of racism, just because I'm a woman of color. I don't think this case was racism. It may be a little bit of discriminatory, or it could be just because I'm not the right fit for his show, because this is a big real estate podcast. So he's like, who are you? This is a white old man. Like, who are you? With a big voice. Like, who are you? Like, I didn't know you're gonna be here today on my podcast. And he asked me, so what do you do? I said, oh, I have a virtual assistant agency, blah, blah. Oh, so you're just going to be here to sell to my audience. I said, no, I'm here to provide value. And it's like, no, I don't normally interview people who owns company. I interview people who are in real estate investing, blah, blah, blah. And so I was caught off guard. I was shocked. And he's like, okay, well, let's just start. And then he asked me, okay, introduce yourself. And then he asked me a question. You know what? Of course, I was like very nervous during that time, but I
Of
tried my
course.
best. And then you know what he told me? Actually, he told me, oh, I couldn't hear you. Are you talking? It's like, are you talking? Like you're kind of choppy. And I was like, yeah, everything is good on my end. I can hear you well. And it's like, no, like I really can't hear you. Blah, blah, blah. And that time I realized he was faking it because he really didn't want me on his show. And I said, well, you know what? It doesn't seem like you really want me on the show. Everything is good on my end. And he's like, okay, well, you're gonna sell to my audience anyway. And then I ended the call. And after that, I had a meltdown. Maybe the kind of meltdown that you had at the airport. I started asking myself, am I not good enough? Is it because I'm a woman of color and I'm young and this person is, here, native English speaker, maybe a millionaire already, was I not good enough? So I started crying and crying and crying. And I talked to my husband and I shared everything to my husband. And even until now, whenever I meet somebody who's white, older than me, maybe in their 50s, 60s, I'm always put my guard on. Okay, is this guy going to be a jerk or not?
Sure.
And then I actually met somebody who is with similar characteristics as this guy, white, older, successful. And this guy was totally opposite of the guy that I met, the podcast host. This guy was so down to earth, willing to share his connections with me, And I told him, you know what, can I be honest? I said, I actually have trauma when it comes to speaking with men in your age, And he's like, oh no, don't even think about them. Of course there's gonna be jerks out there, but he just encouraged me. And so am I healed now from that trauma? I don't know. But I still keep on talking to people with that characteristics, And so, yeah, I just, I think I thought of sharing that story because trauma comes in many forms. It looks different than my trauma and your trauma. So I guess I shared that to ask you, what really is trauma?
That's a great question. It's so important because so many leaders that I will talk to about trauma will say, oh, I haven't had any trauma, because so oftentimes trauma is thought of like a war veteran or someone who's maybe been in an abusive childhood situation or raised in an abusive home or something like that. And that's what you think, these horrific examples, and that's what trauma is. But really the most basic definition of trauma is finding yourself in a position where you feel helpless or not in control. And if you look at trauma as that, then we've all been through trauma. And there's like little T traumas, which is the type of thing that you talked about that you've been through. And then there's these big T traumas where maybe going through a horrific divorce or being in a situation where you're in an unhealthy relationship, or there's been abuse, or you've been in a car accident, or you've been caring for one that's really ill, or you've had a significant loss, somebody that you love has died. So there's those big T traumas. And so often what we find, and especially we find in the business leader and entrepreneur, is we're so busy taking care of everything and everyone else that we don't have time for our own pain. And our MO will be pain. What pain? And we will put it aside and we will go on. We persevere, we push through. And what often happens is we think we've left it behind and we've moved on. But just like your situation continues to come up for you, it's because it hasn't truly been dealt with yet that you've been able to put it behind you. So what I've attempted to do in this book, Your Way Back to Happy, is sharing my story of how I had discovered that, wow, even though I was feeling my life was going really well, I actually had some unresolved pain that now it's time for me to really take a look at it, to uncover it and to heal it. And this book is the roadmap to help you discover if there's maybe some pain in your life that you haven't addressed. Maybe it's a pain you're going through right now,
Right.
or it's a pain from your past. And it can hold you hostage. And sometimes you don't even realize it. Like clients that I will coach on it won't even realize how this trauma is shaping how they behave in their leadership and things like that. And just going back to your story and what you shared, is when you kind of tuck that away and it hasn't been resolved and moved on, that then whenever you encounter another situation that even slightly resembles it, your body and your mind doesn't differentiate something that happened yesterday versus something that's happened right now. So if you've had a traumatic event from yesterday, it can cause you to react to a new situation, still reliving that old pattern, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it's very, very common.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And in the book, I actually highlighted this phrase. It says in the book, perhaps the traits that made you a successful entrepreneur, your efficiency, your tendency to push through are the very things holding you back from healing. Could you explain that a little bit more?
You bet. Well, this was one of the biggest aha moments for me. And it actually happened in the middle of my healing process, that I found that the typical trait of an entrepreneur is, as we just talked about a little bit, is someone who strives through, who when others give up, they keep going, and you make a plan and you push through and you get things done. You set big goals and you accomplish them and you go after the next thing. So I found that I was trying to achieve my healing, and I was trying to push through and make things happen. And where that's important as a leader, that can also hold us back as well. Sometimes we keep pushing through on things that we should stop pushing and let go. And when it comes to healing and healing from past pain, healing from trauma, you don't heal by pushing through. You heal by allowing your body and your mind to really bring up those emotions that are difficult, to accept them, to not push them away or push through them, but to accept them, to break them down, understand them, and then allow it to heal. So when I stopped that whole achiever mode and when I stopped trying to achieve healing, that's when really the healing began.
Right. I love that. And so I know in the book you shared 3 different types of trauma. You mentioned acute, chronic, and complex. Are
Right.
there different tools or ways to cope up with different traumas, like the acute, chronic, and complex?
Yes, I think it's definitely, no trauma is easy, but it's certainly going to be a little easier to work on when there's just been one acute thing that's happened. So say someone's gotten in a serious car accident and it's really made them debilitated for a while. That accident was a trauma, but you can deal with that one thing a little bit easier than the third one you mentioned, was the complex trauma, where you just have layers upon layers of trauma that's built on each other for maybe years and years at a time. So you definitely still can do the same methods, and I provide a lot of different modalities for healing trauma in the book. And everybody's different, so different things work for different people. But taking the time to evaluate what kind of trauma have you had, where is that showing up for you, and then you can look at the path for how you're going to heal that. That's really a helpful part. And what I will tell entrepreneurs, it often is, if you don't know what it is, then go back in your life and you take decade by decade and look at both the really positive events of your life, those positive things that have happened, and then also the notable moments that have been challenges. And as you write those down, you begin to then can dissect them and look at, is this something that I'm really over, or am I still taking this? Is this still showing up for me in different areas of my life?
Right.
So that can be really helpful to identify what those things are. What were those defining moments? How have they shaped you?
That makes sense. Do you feel like resiliency plays a big part when it comes to healing from traumatic events? Do you feel like a person with such high resiliency can overcome traumatic events faster than a person with sort of like lower resiliency?
Good question. Definitely resilience helps so much, and being able to persevere and not give up, because you're going to have a bit of a roller coaster ride when you start to address your trauma. It's not like this and it's over, right? It is a journey that you go through, and there's going to be good days and bad days. And as you learn how to build resilience, then definitely that helps you heal, helps you move through. And I talk about, certainly if you already have some resilience in you, it helps you have that natural strength to be able to do the work to take you through the healing process, right? And then I also give tools about how to build resilience, because oftentimes we don't have the resilience that we really need for the future, because we often have these looping patterns about a certain event or certain events in our life that are actually destructive. And I talk a lot about mindset and mindset resilience. And mindset resilience is about taking charge, and for the entrepreneurs listening, being the boss of your mind and not allowing that negative voice to keep coming up, or those assumptions, those negative assumptions that are related to something that's happened before come up. Like, I think back to what you had talked about as a perfect example. When I talked to a gentleman who is white and over 50, you've made an assumption this is how it's going to be because of how it was before.
Right.
And when we allow those circumstances of the past to continue to shape everything that happens in the future, then we allow that situation to win. And so if I can coach you on that,
yes,
I would
please.
say it's time, particular situation, if anything, is similar to a pattern of behavior that you had before for something else in your life. So was there a time when you were younger that you had those same feelings that I'm not enough, and somebody older is not going to respect me, that I'm too young? Is there an important figure in your life where maybe you responded to in that way? And is there some deeper work that has to be done there? So that would be a question that I would ask you to think about. You don't have to answer that here. And then one of the big things that makes such a difference is to be able to decide when it's over, when you've done the work and you're feeling the freedom and the peace that comes from doing the work and letting it go, to really be able to let it go. And I talk about a story in the book for anybody who's spiritual and knows the Bible, the story of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down, right? In that story, and the walls are down. Well, so many of us in our lives, we may have done the work to bring the walls down, or we think they're down, but we keep putting them back up. And so I say to those that I coach who are going through this and continuing to revisit something from the past, is that's done. Like Jericho, put those walls back up. It's time to really move on and let that go. Then that means for the future, not making the decision that now it's over, so you're not going to talk about it anymore then. Once you've done the work, of course, because doing the work means talking about it, right?
Yes, exactly. I love it. So how do we know whether we're being resilient or we're just numbing ourselves? Or we're just numb to the situation? I feel like I recently take the Enneagram test, and I am the achiever, and I love accomplishing things, and I'm very ambitious. So I know for myself that once I deal with something, once I deal with difficult situations, I allow myself to cry, to be not in the mood, and then after maybe an hour, 2 hours, or maybe a day, I get back up, and I push forward to positivity and
Yes.
thinking that there is, I think my perspective in life right now is, problems are inevitable. Once I have a problem, I process it, and I try my best to solve the problem if it's within my control. And then after that, after I process it, I get back up and deal with the problem, fix it, because my perspective now is if I don't overcome this situation, there's going to be another problem.
Right.
I have two problems, and then if I don't fix those two problems or solve those two problems, I'm going to have another problem. So I have three problems now. It'll be more difficult. So I try my best to, cry, be sad, whatever that is, and then get back up immediately, as maybe fast as I can once I'm okay, because I know that there's going to be more to come in the future, right? Life is not perfect. And so sometimes I ask myself, like, okay, am I being resilient or am I numbing myself? If that makes sense.
Well, I think that you're doing a really great job in how you're handling the challenges that come your way, because it's not if you're going to face challenges, it's when. So it's learning how to deal with those challenges as they come. And you're an achiever and an overcomer, so that's wonderful. Are you, for the situations that happen, it sounds like most of them, you're able to solve what you can solve and then put it behind you and move on, so you're ready for the next challenge. And we're all going to have those challenges, and we can learn how to deal with them and move on and then go to the next thing. Where we can get ourselves into trouble is if we face a really big challenge, and instead of really dealing with it, like you talked about, you were dealing with the problem. Instead, we're not allowing ourselves to feel the emotions about it and really uncover that. And it sounds like you have a process already where you're asking yourself, how is this making me feel? And if it's making you feel sad or angry and or frustrated and you need a cry, that you're allowing yourself to do that. You're not stuffing those emotions. And it really does make a difference when you look at your situation and you look at, okay, what can I do to address this situation? Where do I have control? Because we always have some control. And where do I not? What am I trying to change or push or make happen that really is not within my control? And that's where it can get really frustrating, because we keep thinking we can change something that isn't changeable. So getting really clear on what you can do and then making an action plan and taking steps forward is really helpful, because that's how we get stuck, is if we don't address it in the way you just talked about.
I love that. And in the book, you also talk about healing unresolved trauma through meditation. So meditation is one of the tools that you mentioned in the book to help you heal from trauma. Would you mind sharing with our listeners how you do meditation?
Sure. It's such a big part of my routine now, and it's really made a difference. And I think especially for entrepreneurs and leaders, is we're not very good at stopping and getting quiet. We always have all these different things going on, and we have all these plates that we're holding, and we keep taking another one and another one. And we don't give ourselves time to stop and to really be quiet and to really be present. So when I learned to do that in my own life, it was phenomenal, the difference that it made. And years ago now, someone had told me, oh, you should try meditation. It's helpful for this. And I remember trying it, and I couldn't stay quiet for 5 minutes. I mean, I was so distracted, and how does anybody do this? But once I practiced it, that was how bad I was at being present, right? But once I practiced it, it got easier. You just had to be dedicated to taking that quiet time and making it happen. And then as you do that, what that actually does is it quiets down your brain and your nervous system. It brings you from being in that sympathetic nervous system, which is this go, go, go all the time, and can be the fight or flight too when we're getting in a challenge, versus the parasympathetic, where our heart rate slows down, our breathing slows down, and we're resting. And it's just a great way to let your brain really clear. And it's wonderful for your health and for your well-being. And it's just a wonderful way to build that resilience that we talked about. So I began to do this as part of my morning success ritual, is having a quiet time every single morning in meditation and prayer. And I've done this for years now. And now I've incorporated it in different times throughout my day. And so I've really been encouraging other leaders that I'm coaching to don't just do this one quiet time in the morning and then race yourself through the rest of the day and you don't have time to breathe all day long. Then you're kind of missing the point. It's about learning how to take those breaks as you need them. So add a little bit more bandwidth in your calendar. Don't be going from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, like back to back, where this meeting is running into the next meeting and into the next meeting, and you don't even have time to even get up and get a drink of water, right? That's not good for your well-being. So that's part of those sustainable practices to keep you out of that trauma loop, is to be taking good care of yourself. And one of those ways is just by stopping through meditation, and then and other ways of giving yourself a break too.
I love that. And I love having my quiet time as well. I don't really call it meditation. I feel like sometimes the word meditation has a bad rap for Christians, right?
Sure,
because they think about it as, Buddhism or other religions that does meditation or yoga or anything like that. So I just call it my quiet time. So I'm not very consistent with my quiet time every day. Sometimes I do it before going to bed, but I feel like starting it in the morning is one of the best times to do it, because it sets your day. But I also agree that you need to do it in between what you're doing as well, especially if you're in a very difficult situation. I think though the challenge with me when I do my quiet time is sometimes I don't want to stop. You know why? Because because when I read the Bible and it's really good, like I tend to like really decipher each of the word, like, okay, what does it mean to trust? What's the application? Because sometimes the word trust, we're so used to it. It's like, oh, trust, so simple. Just trust somebody, But if you look up the word trust, it means surrendering to God, letting go. It may be a simple English word, but the definition of it is broad. Sometimes when I enjoy my quiet time, I'm like, oops, time's up. I've been doing this for an hour. But I think there's discipline that I need to do in that area, and definitely prayer, because we're not really in control of everything that's going on in our life. And sometimes when you pray and you know that you've given it to God, you know that God got you, like you don't have to worry about anything that you prayed for, because it's already in God's hand. And so in the book, I know we're kind of over time here a little bit, but I love what we're talking about. So
me too. I'm good.
So you also talk about moving your body, which is very important, regardless if you have trauma in your past life or not, which we all have trauma in our
everybody has challenges. Sure.
True. Yeah, but you also talk about breath work as a path to healing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
You bet. So it can be incorporated with your meditation routine or your quiet time, but most of us don't breathe properly. And I realized for myself when I started becoming more self-aware, and that this happens through research. It says as well that if you've been through traumatic experiences in your life, you tend to breathe more shallow, which isn't healthy, or sometimes we will even hold our breath. So if we can do breath work and we can learn how to really breathe properly, it can do wonders for your well-being. It's great for your physical health, your mental health, and it can actually help you heal trauma as well. Because if you're in a situation where you're going through a really challenging time, is typically, like I said, you're doing that shallow breathing, and that is making your heart race. It's increasing health issues potentially that can happen for you. So if you can learn how to slow your breathing down, as we talked about earlier, then it brings you into that sympathetic state. And that can all be practiced with regular breath work. So I do this as a practice regularly as well. And this is something that you can, there's lots of apps for it that you can do breath work. It's called like dynamic breathing is another word for it, or just simply following your breath. So you can do something as simple as like the 4x4 count, where you're doing a breath in for 4 seconds, you're holding for 4 seconds, you're breathing out for 4 seconds and holding for 4 seconds. So it's also called box breathing. So that's just one really simple example, and something that I teach because we really don't, most of us don't breathe properly. We really forget about it. And it can make such a difference in not only our healing journey, but also building that resilience that we talked about, which is so important.
I love it. I love it. So breath work is something that I have not done really yet. I feel like I only do that when something is already going on, when I need to, when my heart is heavy. That's the only time I do breath work. It's probably not even the proper way of doing it, but I think I agree that you have to incorporate it with your quiet time or your meditation, because our heart is important, and our lungs, right? They're important organs in our bodies.
Of course.
Right. So I think as we wrap up, I really want to ask this question, because you also talk about the brain, and it says in the book that the brain seems to be the only important organ in the body that we rarely test to see how healthy it is. And I love the stories that you shared about the test that you and Graham had,
So true.
And so do you feel like trauma is because of how we think, or how we perceive things, or how information is retained in our minds, in our brain?
I think that trauma causes us to have problems where our brain can be dysregulated. And so that can be the issue with the brain. Yes. And I definitely found that out for myself. And the good news is through neuroplasticity, we can actually change how our brains are showing up. We can rewire, because if you've been through trauma, then somehow through those experiences, you've wired your brain to have these certain responses and certain reactions, certain thoughts, and then behaviors. And the good news is that you can become aware of that and learn how to train your brain. You can rewire those and get new neural pathways to really heal those old patterns, so you don't keep going back to that.
I love that. So you really have to train your brain, right? And
You do.
And one thing I learned recently as well is that it's all about our perspective in life, the way how we handle things, the way how we respond to things.
So true.
It's all about our perspective. And I've been telling people that the circumstance that you are in may not be your fault, and you're not the one to be blamed for it. But if you don't get out of your situation, well, then it's kind of your fault, because we are in control of our life, right? And we can design our life the way we wanted it to, right? But that's why in your book, you also talk about choosing happiness every day, right?
Yes.
And that is being in control of your life, regardless of the environment that you are in. Choosing happiness every day is very, very important. So
Good point.
This is the question that my previous guest asked. And his question is, I think, very timely for what we are talking about today. When your motivation runs dry, what helps you stay in motion?
That's a great question. And I do think it's very relevant for what we've been talking about. And when you discover that you've lost your motivation, or I'll say you've lost your mojo, is the most important thing to do is to stop. Because what we typically do is we just keep going and we keep pushing ourselves to a point that we're just exhausted. And usually the best thing to do is a change of pace, a change of place, where you can really take a moment and stop and get some rest, likely, because perhaps the reason you've lost that motivation is you're on your way to burnout, which happens for many entrepreneurs and business leaders. So just taking that time for the rest that you need. And when you've done that, then you can get clarity about the situation, why, and ask yourself, why have I lost this motivation? And it could just be that you just needed a rest and a break. It could be that you're in situations that you're not responsible for the situation that you may find yourself in, but we're always responsible for our attitude and the choice that we then make from there, right?
I love that. So, have you taken a break from business? Did you come to a point where you're like just tired of what you're doing and you needed a break? How long did it take you to do the break or rest?
That's important. And I would say that it was many years into my first business where before I really learned how to take true rest. And you may relate to this, you may take a vacation or a trip, but you're constantly still checking your emails and you're checking in with the office, and you say, I'm just going to take care of these couple things, and then I'll spend the rest of the day doing things with my family or whatever it may be. But when you do that, your mind is immediately into your work, and so you're really not giving yourself a break from work. So I learned how to be very intentional and to intentionally unplug. So no phone, no checking work emails, no having work calls, no reading business materials, and really taking those breaks. And I got better and better at doing that. I made a plan to do that because when you're running a business, you have a lot of responsibilities. So other people need to be able to step in. Right. So it requires some planning to do that. And eventually I took a 1-year sabbatical and I had to plan for it, but I was able to take completely a year off and allow my team to run the company, and it went beautifully. But it takes work to be able to do that. And now I'll continue to take sabbaticals, and my husband and I will do that for shorter periods of time, where once you get it set up, and you can't do this, of course, when you're just starting to build a business, but when you get to a point that you can do it, you can just do a test with unplugging for a short period of time, and then you can plan to do that longer and longer.
I love it. Thank you so much for that amazing insight, Janelle. So what question do you want to ask my next guest?
Well, this really leads from what we were just talking about, which is really, really cool. So I wanted to have you ask your next guest, when is the last time you have truly unplugged from your work and been present? And how did you do it successfully?
I love it.
So that would be the question. And I would say that when they answer truly unplugged from their work, that means that they're not checking their work email, they're not checking in with the office, that they're truly able to disconnect.
I love it. I love it. That is a good reflection question, actually, for a lot of our listeners. So, Your Way Back to Happy. I love this book, and everything that we talk about today is just 1% of what's in the book. So if you enjoyed everything we talk about today, definitely go to Amazon and then buy Your Way Back to Happy: How to Turn the Pain of Your Past into a Future of Freedom, Purpose, and Peace. So Janelle, where can people find you?
You can go to legacy-leader.com, and that will tell you about our company and the different things that we're doing and how we help entrepreneurs next level their leadership and life. And you can also learn more about the book there as well as other books that I have.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Janelle, for your time and for everything that you shared. I'm sure our listeners are going to learn a lot from this episode.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Christy.
You're welcome.